Let's talk about fake watches, and in particular the role that auction houses might play in enabling fake watches to be sold to the unknowing public, and to some extent what you might do to try to protect yourselves. So let's look at an example, and in particular here I'm looking at an auction run by Theodore Bruce, which is of Sydney Airport lost property. And here we have a watch that purports to be an Audemars Piguet. It's listed as a gentleman's wristwatch marked Audemars Piguet, automatic. Now clearly we can see something is going wrong here. They're not saying it's an Audemars Piguet, they're saying it is marked as an Audemars Piguet. That to some extent is a red flag, but it gets a little bit worse. We can look at a photograph of the dial of this watch, and to some extent things look a little bit off, but maybe it's just a bad photo, maybe if we're being a little bit generous. But if we dig through these photos, we can clearly see that the movement is both quartz and is Japanese made, i.e. it is not an Audemars Piguet, nor is it automatic, nor is the movement anything even resembling a genuine movement. The watch is obviously, at best, a Frankenstein's monster, but in reality it's probably likely to be completely fake. This obviously is a problem, because at least at the time of recording, this auction is A, still live, and has bids up to 11,000 Australian dollars, and has 46 bids on it. Now one can argue that these bidders probably should know better. Maybe these bidders should have poked through the photos. Maybe they should have done a little bit of due diligence, looking at, well, what types of movements are automatic movements? What types of movements would be an Audemars Piguet? Where would these movements come from? That type of thing. But you've often got a lot of retail buyers who don't necessarily know very much about watches. Maybe they kind of like Audemars Piguet, maybe they've sort of heard of the brand, but they don't really know anything about watches. People who are really not in the watch world. And those are the people who are really being taken advantage of. Potentially, in this case, all 46 bidders here bidding up to $11,000. Now this obviously poses a problem. Someone, in this case the lost property department, is clearly making off with a ton of money. They're clearly going to be making money off goods that they didn't actually need to buy, they were lost property, but also even if they did buy this, they'd be making off with a massive profit by flipping a fake item. The auction house here, to my mind, is a little bit responsible. The auction house should clearly not be selling goods that are obviously fake, because clearly the loser here is the person who buys this, not really knowing what is genuine and what is not. The person who loses here is the person who doesn't really know watches, and those people should not be scammed. After all, those people should not be taken advantage of, much like people who don't really know about stocks should not be taken advantage of by unscrupulous financial planners. It's the same basic logic. It's why fakes should not be sold, especially not be sold by reputable auction houses. This obviously has on-flow effects. The immediate loser is clearly the buyer. But there are losers broadly within the ecosystem, losers in the second-hand watch market more generally. Because every time you have a reputable auction house selling a watch that is clearly fake, without specifically indicating that it is obviously not genuine, you're going to have people distrust the whole secondary market. After all, if a reputable auction house is selling something that is obviously not genuine, then what about some person on Facebook Marketplace, or eBay, or Chrono24, or any other platform? How do you know what is real or what is not? So you've got a whole host of issues here, and the auction houses seem to give rise to this sense of security. People seem to believe that because it's going through a reputable auction house, they can rely upon it being authentic, even though the auction house actually disclaims any responsibility for verifying its authenticity. So that is obviously a problem. It harms everyone, not just the buyer, but the broader ecosystem. Interestingly enough, I've actually emailed through to the auction house to alert them to this listing being clearly for a non-genuine watch. At the time of recording, I've not actually heard back a response to my email, but obviously they still have some time before the auction ends, and they might ultimately take it down. So we don't want to prejudge what they do. Alternatively, they might update the listing and perhaps cancel some of the bids and try to relist it. But regardless, it's obviously a problem. This of course begs the question of whether it's illegal for an auction house to sell clearly counterfeit goods. Now, I am neither an IP nor a trademark lawyer, and a lot of this will depend upon the jurisdiction in which this is operating. However, as far as I can tell, in Australia, where that auction is taking place, it is illegal to be selling such counterfeit goods. Under the Trademarks Act of 1995, Section 148, it specifically prohibits people from selling goods that have a trademark, i.e. Audemars Piguet, applied to it, and that's been added without permission of the original trademark owner. That is, it is illegal to be selling counterfeit goods. There does not appear to be an exemption for an auction house. However, clearly if they're selling something innocently and unknown to them, and perhaps they had duped themselves and they didn't actually know it was counterfeit, then obviously there could be a little bit of a let out there. However, it would seem to be clearly illegal for them to be selling what is clearly a counterfeit item and doing so knowingly if that were to be the case. However, as I indicated, I am neither an IP nor a trademark lawyer, and clearly people who are more expert than I am could tell you a definitive answer to this. And as I indicated, a lot of this will depend upon the exact location in which the auction is taking place. So do your own research about the exact auction house you're looking at if you were looking at a specific item. The question is then, what might you do about this? Well, the first thing is you need to do your due diligence on any auction listing if you are looking to buy. Look at all of the photos in clear detail. Look at whether this watch looks like it is genuine. If you're not sure, specifically ask the auction house whether they've got any records and whether they'll stand by the authenticity of that watch. If the auction house won't stand by the authenticity of the watch they're selling, then that's clearly a red flag to begin with. Second, you might go to auction houses such as Grailsea that do actually stand by the authenticity of what they are selling. Those types of auction houses are perhaps going to be a little bit more reliable. Obviously, things can still slip through the cracks, but if the auction house or the specific listing does guarantee authenticity, then at least you've got a measure of protection. It's not perfect, you should never be sold a fake, and clearly there can be some implications of postage and the like, and money that you might not actually get back, but it does to some extent help to mitigate the risks involved if they do stand behind the authenticity of the listing. Next, you might want to just skip the auctions altogether. Oftentimes auctions go for quite high prices, oftentimes there isn't enough detail in the auction listing for you to know if it's authentic. Maybe the photos are bad quality. Maybe they're taken at such an angle that you can't really tell whether it's authentic or not. And in this case, you might look at other secondary sources. Here you might look for sellers that are reputable. Sellers who are clearly listing things where they have a reputation that is being put on the line. If someone who is known within the watch industry or who has a high public profile is selling a watch, then you know that it cost them something to have sold you a fake. You know that if someone has a public profile and they sell you a fake and they don't make it right, they're going to be called out and it will look incredibly bad for them and they have something to lose. Similarly, if the person is a known seller in the watch industry, similarly with someone in the watch industry, if they're selling you a fake and they don't make it right, then clearly they could suffer reputational damage which would undermine their business. You can look out for signals where if something goes wrong, you can clearly have some recourse and it is actually going to be costly to the person to actually sell you a fake. By contrast with some of these auction houses, it appears so transactional and the business is so ephemeral and so inconsistent that maybe they aren't actually losing very much by selling an item that is clearly not a genuine Audemars Piguet in this case. Now this clearly is unlikely to be an isolated incident. In prior situations, I've seen fake Panerais come up for auction, although in that particular case the auction house did actually remove it when it was discovered that it was ultimately fake, but the auction house should have done their due diligence first. Clearly the auction houses have their work cut out for them. Nevertheless, it's quite possible that fake items within the auction industry are possibly quite widespread, and it clearly is something you need to be incredibly cautious about. And if in any doubt, don't bid. If the deal looks too good to be true, don't bid on it. If you have questions about the authenticity, don't bid on it, and at least reach out to try to find answers to your concerns. And if you don't know how to evaluate authenticity, at least try to look at what other people are saying about that watch, try to at least do some basic cross-referencing. After all, in this Audemars Piguet example, if you did some basic research on it, you would discover that movement was not in any way close to being genuine, and that watch would not be worth anywhere near $11,000. Regardless, that's what's happening in the auction industry. If you've got any thoughts about fake watches in the auction industry, let me know that in the comments below. I'd like to hear your thoughts as well. Otherwise, thanks a lot for tuning in, and hopefully I see you next time as well.